in less than 48 hours, it'll be Yom Kippur. And in less than 72 hours, Yom Kippur will be over. I don't think there's any need to discuss what's at stake. The Machzor tells us, Rosh Hashanah yikasevun, Yom Kippur yechasemun, on Rosh Hashanah, our fate is written. On Yom Kippur, our fate is sealed. Mi yichya, mi yamus, who will live, who will die. We all know what's at stake. In Shamayim, in heaven, there's a scale. There's a balance scale. And on one side of the scale, we have our schuyas, our merit. On the other side, we have our averis. And at this point, we don't know exactly which side is heavier. And we only have a couple of days left. So the question is, what is the strategy that we should utilize? The Rambam writes that there was a widespread minhag, a widespread practice in Klal Yisrael, that these few days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, to do more mitzvahs, give more tzedakah, daven more. This way we would add some more mitzvahs to the side of merit. The question is, how much do we need to add? And is there enough time to do those extra mitzvahs that we need? We don't know. We don't know how imbalanced our scales are. Furthermore, there's another problem. As we know, in a budget, it's not enough just to increase revenue. Sometimes you have to cut expenses too. Or if you want to lose weight, it isn't enough just to burn off more calories. You have to take in fewer calories. So it's not enough just to add mitzvahs and hope that will tip the scale. We also have to remove some of the averis. We have to make that side of the scale lighter. Now there's only one way to do that, and that's tshuva. Tshuva can remove the averis. But tshuva is easier said than done. The hardest part of tshuva is simply aziva sachet, just to stop doing what we've been doing. And that's a fairly tall order. And it seems to me that we've reached the point of despair, giving up hope. If we ask ourselves honestly, what are we going to be able to accomplish over the next 2 days, both in terms of adding mitzvahs to the side of merit, and in terms of removing averis through tshuva, it almost seems that we have an impossible task, something that we cannot possibly dream of accomplishing in 2 days. So I would like to share with you something very, very practical, something very, very down to earth, something we all have to know, which is the power of a cabal, the power of a resolution. If a person makes a commitment to doing something or to stop doing something, it's a very powerful thing. And the source of this idea is a comment of Rabbi Eliezer in Pirkei Avos. The Mishnah there speaks about a very odd phenomenon. A person who is maisav merubim mechachmaso, a person whose deeds are more than his wisdom, more than his knowledge. He does more than he knows. So Rabbi Eliezer asks the obvious question: how can a person do more than he knows? In terms of mitzvahs, you only can do what you know. If you don't know, you can't do. So what is the idea of maisav rub michachmaso, a person whose deeds are more than his knowledge? So Rabbi Eliezer says an amazing thing, and he brings this from Chazal. When Klal Yisrael stood at Har Sinai, they said, Nasa v'nishma. We commit ourselves to doing, and then we'll hear exactly what it is we're meant to do. They made a commitment to do even before they knew what they were going to do. Says the Avos Reb Nosson that as soon as they made that commitment, all the reward, all the merit that would follow from that commitment was credited to their accounts in advance. That if a person makes a Kabbalah, a person makes a commitment, a resolution to do something, all the good deeds that follow from that commitment are credited to your account in advance. And in that instance, they didn't even know what it would be. Because when they made the commitment of Nasa, they had not yet heard what the mitzvos would be. And yet they were given all the credit, all the schar, all the reward for the mitzvos that would follow from that cabal. That's how you have a person who's ma'asav ruben michachmasav. He has more merits, he has more good deeds than he knows. Because he made a commitment. He made a pledge. He said, I will do whatever the Ribono Shel Olam asks. I'll do whatever the Chachamim tell me to do. And in advance, you get the credit. Imagine a person going into Yom Kippur, and he doesn't know exactly where the two sides of his scale stand. But he makes a commitment. I'm going to do something positive this year. So let's say he commits himself to a regular program of learning Torah. Whether for some people it'll be Daf Yomi or some people it'll be something else, but he makes a commitment to learning Torah. That means all the Torah learning that will follow from that commitment is credited to his account in advance. Which means that it's not a question of how many mitzvahs can we do in these 2 days. The question is making the right type of commitment. If we make a pledge, we make a promise that we are going to do X, and from that promise follows good deeds for years to come, we have all that credit in advance, and that can tip the scales in our favor. Now it's important to know that for a resolution to be effective, I believe there are 3 requirements. Number 1, it has to be well defined. If a person says, I resolve that this year I'm going to be a better person, it's too vague, too general. You'll never know whether you were or whether you weren't. It has to be well defined. It has to be verifiable. It has to be something that can be measured, that can be assessed, that can be recorded. You know, in the United States, if you follow the news, there's a very serious question as to whether the stimulus program was successful. One would have thought that the metric should be jobs created. So they were mechadesh a new metric, job saved. So on that basis, you could say that it was a rousing success, because without it, it would have been much worse. That's not a real measure of things. You can't make a Kabbalah and say, well, I really don't know if I accomplished anything. I don't know if I did anything. But had I not made the Kabbalah, I'm sure it would have been worse. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about something that can be verified, that can be measured. Now let me give you an example. One area where everyone needs to improve is the area of Lashon Hara. Everyone can improve in that area, to speak less Lashon Hara. If a person says, my Kabbalah for this year is to speak less Lashon Hara, I think number 1, it's too vague. And number 2, it's not verifiable. Unless you're going to record every conversation you have over the course of the year and spend the time listening to the tapes, how will you ever know? But there's an amazing practice that many people have embraced. Many people have accepted upon themselves the practice of learning 2 halachas every day from the Sefer Chofetz Chaim. The Chofetz Chaim wrote halachas. He wrote a veritable Shulchan Aruch on how to be careful in the halachas of Lashon Hara. So there's a calendar, it's printed, publicized, and people have to practice. Every day they learn 2 halachas. Now we know, Chazal tell us that Torah, if you learn Torah, it's mevi lidei zehirus. It brings a person to caution. It brings a person to avoid sin. And it does this in many ways, in mystical ways, in metaphysical ways. Rabbi Eliezer wrote that it also brings us to zehirus in a very practical, down-to-earth way. Because the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, finds a foothold where there is a lack of clarity on the halacha. When a person doesn't know what is asur and what is mutter, that's where the Yetzer Hara tells you it's probably okay. I'm sure it's all right. There certainly are opinions you can rely on. Where there is lack of clarity in terms of the halacha, that's when the Yetzer Hara makes its inroads. And therefore, if a person makes a resolution that I'm going to learn 2 halachas a day, so first you have the metaphysical benefit of Torah. Torah brings a person to caution. Torah is the tablin, it's the antidote, Chazal say, to the Yetzer Hara. Number 2, if you study those particular halachas, then you have clarity on the halacha that pertains to that area of life, and you will improve in this area. No doubt about it. And it's something that can be verified. All you have to do is get yourself a little notebook that has columns, and write in the dates, and write a check. In fact, I believe that for the Shmiras Halashim, there already is a calendar you can buy, or even get for free, download, and just check off every day. And when you do that, you can look at the check marks in your little calendar, and as the row of check marks gets longer and longer and longer, it becomes self-reinforcing. I've done it for a week. I've done it for 2 weeks. I've done it for 3 weeks. I've done it for a month, 2 months, 3 months. You'll reach the point where you won't want to break a habit. You won't want to break your perfect record. And then there'll be the day that you were very busy, there was a simcha, it's 1 o'clock in the morning, you're exhausted, but you'll tell yourself, no, I'm not going to go to bed without learning my 2 halachas. And that's something which can be easily verified and recorded. And that leads us to the 3rd requirement, that it has to be something which is feasible, something which is reasonable. Because the real problem with many Kabbalahs is that they're too ambitious. To fast a meruba like the faster, we bite off more than we can chew. But 2 little halachas is not more than we can chew. So that Kabbalah is first of all something well defined. It's something which is verifiable. You know that you did it. You know if you didn't do it. And it's something which is feasible. It's something which is reasonable. A Kabbalah that meets those 3 requirements is an effective Kabbalah. And it's important to know that in a related context, the Ran in Maseches Nedarim says an amazing chidush. There's a pasuk in Kehelas which says, "Toiv asher lo tidor." It's better not to make a vow, mishetidor v'lo tishalem, than making a vow and not keeping it. So the Ran in Maseches Nedarim asks, of course, pshita, of course it's that way. Who in the world would think that it's better to make a vow if you're not going to ultimately keep it? So the Ran says a chiddush. The Ran says, no, I would have had a havamina. I could have imagined it's better to make the vow. For example, let's say a person makes a vow to do something, and ultimately he doesn't keep the vow because of some act of God, something beyond his control, what we call an einus. So one might say, well, he has reward for making the vow, and the fact he didn't keep it, einus rachmana patre, the Torah exempts the person who is an onus. Says the Ran doesn't work that way, because the reward for a commitment doesn't come when you make the commitment. It comes when you keep the commitment. even if you are prevented, you're constrained by circumstances beyond your control, you don't have the reward for the commitment. And therefore it's very important to not be too ambitious. It'd be something that you can actually do, because the reward only comes when you do it. So this is a very powerful thing. If a person makes a Kabbalah, he makes a well-formulated commitment. And by the way, Shmiras HaLashon is just one example. That particular technique of learning the halachas that pertain to an area of observance can be applied to any area of observance. Let's say a person wants to be more scrupulous in honoring his parents. Looking around the room, I would say 50% of the assembled think that's a good idea. The parents. The other half, I don't know. But in any case, if it's kibbud avoim, you can do the same thing. There's a siman in the Chai Adam on the halachas of kibbud avoim. Make yourself a schedule. Every day I'll learn one halacha. You probably can complete the whole thing in a month. And if month after month after month you review those halachas again and again, it'll raise your consciousness. You'll understand. This is what I must do. This is what I must not do. The whole mitzvah will be transformed through this process of meeting and fulfilling that regular commitment. Now, I would like to take this a step further. What if the Kabbalah is not simply to do a good deed, but what if the Kabbalah is to do something toward the process of tshuva? My Kabbalah relates to an area where I need to repair myself, an area where I've been deficient in the past. So my Kabbalah is that I will embark on the process of tshuva. I will take the first steps towards tshuva. I will work somehow at aziva sachet. I will work towards Kabbalah lahaba. I would speculate, I don't think this is too far off, that the tshuva that results from that Kabbalah will also be credited to your account in advance, and it could even remove averis that have already been done. In the same way that the Kabbalah has the power to credit mitzvos to your account, it can credit tshuva to your account. If it credits tshuva to your account, it removes averis, which is an amazing, amazing idea. It actually transforms what Yom Kippur is meant to be. And that's really what I want to talk about tonight. We always think of Yom Kippur as being the culmination of a process. We've been working since Rosh Chodesh Elul, we've been doing tshuva, Rosh Hashanah, Aseret Simei Tshuva. Everything is complete, everything is done. The Ramban even writes in his Chidushim to Maseches Yuma that our practice to say vidui at the mincha erev Yom Kippur is because the ideal is that we should go into Yom Kippur 100% clean. And that's why the Chazal were misakein that we should say vidui erev Yom Kippur. So imagine if we had a Yom Kippur like that we've been working for 40 days, Elul and Rosh Hashanah and Aseret Simei Tshuva, and we are totally clean. We're going into Yom Kippur in a state of purity. So then Yom Kippur would just be the icing on the cake. We'd come to the Ribono Shel Olam and say, Ribono Shel Olam, we have completed the Avodah of Tshuva, and now we're putting the finishing touches on it. We're going to say the Vidui, which is the culmination of the process. It will be a lovely Yom Kippur. But I don't think for many of us, that is what Yom Kippur is. For many of us, and I'm speaking about myself, it's not the culmination of weeks and weeks of hard work. But I think that Yom Kippur could be something else. Yom Kippur could be a beginning. Now it's a new way of looking at Yom Kippur. I believe it's a new paradigm, a total revolution in how we look at Yom Kippur. But I think we can look at it that way. that Yom Kippur is not going to be the culmination of Elul. But Yom Kippur will be the beginning, it'll be our first step in the process of tshuva. And I would like to explain what such Yom Kippur would be. What are we meant to experience? What are we meant to feel on a Yom Kippur, which is not the case, mechilu slicha, not the end of a process, but rather the beginning of a process. We know that there are many karbonos that were brought in the Beis Hamikdash when it stood on Yom Kippur. One of the features of the Avodah was a pair of seirim, a pair of goats, identical twins. And the Kohen Gadol cast lots. One goat became the So'ir Lashem. It was brought as a carbon to the Ribono Shel Olam. The other goat was the scapegoat. It was thrown off the cliff, La'azazel. What is the idea of the two goats, the twin goats? What does this symbolize? And the Shemesh Shmuel brings from his father, the Avena Nezer, the Sachet Shavar, that the two goats, the Soyer Lashem, this is his wording, Hu lahagbiya es hachelek hatoiv. It is to elevate the good side. That's the Soyer Lashem. And the Soyer La'azazel is lidchais es chelek hara, is to push aside the evil portion. Let's analyze these two one at a time. Let's begin with the Soyer La'azazel. The idea of ridding ourselves of the evil portion. You know, every person, every human being has a dual nature. When we talk about the Avos HaKadoshim, we see them as archetypes, as pure personalities. Yaakov Avinu is the embodiment of goodness. His twin brother, Esav, is the embodiment of evil. Each is pure, 100%. Yaakov is the 100% pure, Esav is the 100% impure. Each of us is kind of a mix. We all have dual personalities. There are good aspects, there are negative aspects, and we could say that each of us has a little Yaakov in us and a little Esav in us. And what we want to do on Yom Kippur, first and foremost, is get rid of the Esav. If you are familiar with the famous story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, that is exactly the premise of the story. That every person is really a mixture of good and evil, and the experiment that Dr. Jekyll performed was to remove that element of evil, and thereby he created Mr. Hyde. Ein kan mokum laharech. This isn't the place to discuss the story at length, but if you ever find yourself reading it, you'll see that this is really a Musar Sefer. It really is something very, very deep. So every person has a little bit of Yaakov in him and a little bit of Esav in him. We want to divest ourselves of the Esav. What do Chazal tell us about the So'ir La'azazel? It says in the Pasuk, V'nosa haso'ir alav es kol avonaisam el eretz gezerah. That the goat will carry all their sins to the rugged land. He's thrown off the cliff. And the Medrash says in this pasuk that the So'ir really is Esav. Because the pasuk says that Esav was an ish So'ir. He was a hairy man. A goat is called a So'ir because as opposed to a sheep which has wool, it has hair. So a goat is a So'ir. It's really a hairy sheep, if you will. And Esav is the ish So'ir, is the hairy person. So when it says in the pasuk, "V'nasa haso'ir olav," that means Esav will bear the sins. Whose sins? As kol avonaisam, Say Chazal, that means Avonais Tam, the sins of Yaakov, who is called the Ish Tam, the perfect person. Meaning that is the symbolism of the Shiluach HaSoyer. It is taking Esav and sending him away. We remain behind, purified, the pure Yaakov, and the Esav within us is sent aside. That's a very, very great thing. Now, obviously, the Soyer LaAzazel is symbolic. But it's symbolic of what we're meant to do. We're meant to divest ourselves of that evil which is within us. And that's what the Sachat Shavar says. That the Soyer LaAzazel is lidchais es chelek harat, to push aside the evil portion. We remove the evil from us, and we're left with the good. But the truth is, when you think about it for a moment, we think about our Averis. Many of our Averis are not really Averis at all. Many Yiddish Averis are really nothing more than not doing mitzvos as good as we could. For example, you go to a person, ask the person, tell me, what Averis are you confessing this Yom Kippur? Maybe the person won't tell you. But you go to a person, what Averis are on your mind? And they'll tell you, I davened without cabal. Well, think about that. Think about that. He didn't kill anybody. He didn't steal from anybody. He didn't eat treif. Chas v'shalom. He did a mitzvah, but not in the best possible way. That's also an aveira of sorts. But you think about it, a lot of the things that really trouble us are not so much that we've done aveiras, but we haven't done our mitzvahs as we should have. We haven't done them with passion. We haven't done them with understanding. We haven't done them with seriousness. We haven't done them with diktuk, with precision, in terms of keeping the halacha. That's not the soyer la'azazel. That's the soyer la'Hashem. The soyer la'Hashem is to elevate the chelek ha'toiv. Let's understand this more deeply. If you look at Chazal, the Mishnah in the beginning of Masechah Shavuos, the Mishnah discusses a very interesting thing. We find that on every Rosh Chodesh and every Yontif, as part of the Karban Musaf, we bring a goat. On Rosh Chodesh, you bring a goat. Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot, every day. Rosh Hashanah, there's always a goat. The Musaf of Yom Kippur also has a goat, as part of the Karban Musaf. Besides the Shnei Asirim, the twin goats, which are part of the Avodas Hayom for Yom Kippur, there's a goat as part of the Karban Musaf. What do all these goats atone for? So the Mishnah Shavuos tells us they all relate to a single sin. The sin of Tumas Migdash V'Kodoshav. The sin of going into the Beis HaMikdash in a state of impurity, or partaking of the Karbonos in a state of impurity. So the Mishnah explains, the soyer of Rosh Chodesh is mechaper for tahar sha'achal esatame. A person was tahar, he himself was tahar, but the meat of the carbon that he ate was tameh. That's what the soyer of Rosh Chodesh is mechaper for. The soyer of Yontif is mechaper for tumas migdash u'kedashav, where ein lo yediyah lo b'tchila v'lo b'sayf. The person is totally oblivious. He never knew that he's tameh, and even subsequent, he never discovered that he was tameh. He has no knowledge of any tumah at all, but it happened. That needs a kapara. That takes place on every yontif. On Yom Kippur, the so'ir hanas b'chutz, the so'ir which is part of the Karban Musaf, this is mechaper for the case where he did not have a yediyah b'tchila, but he had a yediyah b'sayf. Before he did the aveira, he didn't know that he's tameh, but he subsequently discovered. The soyer hanasa b'fnim, the twin, is mechaper for the opposite case, where he had a yediyah b'tchila and not b'sayf. So these goats are all mechaper for tumas migdash u'kedashav. So the question is, what does that mean? I mean, there's a big Torah, 613 mitzvahs. We need so many karbanos to be machaper for this one sin of tumas. What does it mean, tumas migdash u'kedasha? So the Kedushas lady, the Breitowitz, says an amazing insight. He says like this. So how does it come to pass? We're talking about the Beis HaMikdash. We're talking about karbanos. A person is tameh. He goes into the Beis HaMikdash. He eats karbanos. How does that happen? Well, it happens because mistakes happen. People make mistakes. But would people make mistakes if they really had adequate regard for what they were doing? If a person understood what the Beis HaMikdash was, if he understood what a karban was, would a person ever make a mistake? He wouldn't make a mistake. We make mistakes about things that aren't important to us. But something that is critically important, we wouldn't make mistakes. So the whole year, we make mistakes. On regular Sundays, we make mistakes. Regular Mondays, we make mistakes. Tuesdays, we make mistakes. Wednesdays, we make mistakes. Thursdays, even Shabbos, we make mistakes. Because we don't appreciate the Beis HaMikdash. We don't appreciate what karbanos are. But then a special occasion comes. A Rosh Chodesh comes. A Yom Tov comes. And those are days of special enlightenment. Those are days of special inspiration. We're uplifted. And on those days, we tell ourselves, uh-oh, how could I have made a mistake? On these days, our appreciation, on these days, our understanding, on these days, our seriousness is raised to a new level. And then we look back at the mistakes we made, and we say, we shouldn't have made those mistakes. We should have been more serious. We need a Caparo. And that's why the idea of tumas migdash u'kedasha, these are sins which occur on regular weekdays. Yet we don't bring the Caparo then. Because at that point we can't even appreciate it. We can't even see ourselves having done anything wrong. But when we come to a Rosh Chodesh, we come to a Yom Tov, our awareness is raised to a new level. Now we understand we should have been more careful. And this is an amazing, amazing thing. The Chovos HaLevavos writes this. The Chovos HaLevavos writes that there are tzadikim who never sin, and yet their whole lives they are engaged in tshuva. So Chovos HaLevavos Perek Gimel of Shar Avenas Elokim. They never sin, and yet their entire lives they're doing tshuva. What are they doing tshuva for? They never sin. Because as they grow every day, and their understanding becomes deeper, more profound every day they understand that my Avodas Hashem of yesterday was inadequate. It wasn't enough. The Rebbeinu Shalom deserved better. He deserved more. And every day they look back at the day before as needing tikkun, as needing elevation, as needing improvement. There is a famous story, often quoted. The story is quoted in the Sefer Siduro Shel Shabbos, Drush Gimel. A famous story of Rav Sadia Gaon. That Rav Sadia Gaon was once visited by a student. And the student saw him. He was in a state of self-affliction. He was tormenting himself. So the Talmud asked Rav Sadia Gaon, he certainly didn't do an Avena. Why are you tormenting yourself? So he said, I'll tell you a story. I had an experience. And that's why I'm tormenting myself. What was the experience? Recently I went on a trip. And I came to a town. And no one knew who I was. It's not like nowadays that we read the newspapers and they have pictures of our Gedolim. This was before printing, before photography. So a person could travel incognito. So Rav Sadia Gaon came to a town, no one knew who he was. And he stayed in a hotel, and the owner of the hotel treated him very nicely, like he would treat any other person. Didn't give him any special respect because he was the Gadol Hador. Treated him nicely, respectfully. But the word got out to town that Reb Sadigan, the Gadol Hador, is here. And after a while, people started coming. They came for brachas, they came for eitzes, they came with shailas. And the innkeeper began to realize that his guest is not just a regular person, that his guest is the Gadol Hador. So he began to really give him a lot of kavod, a lot of honor, and he served him in a very elegant way, and so on and so forth. Because it's his guest, and now he understands who his guest is. When Reb Sadigan was about to leave, so the hotel keeper came to his room and threw himself at Reb Sadigan's feet and begged forgiveness. So Reb Sadigan says, "Why are you begging forgiveness? You treated me wonderfully." So the innkeeper said, "No, I'm begging forgiveness for those first few hours before I knew who you were. And I treated you like I would treat any Jew. But that wasn't enough. Because now I know you were the Gadol Hador. Now that I discovered you the Gadol Hador, I realized that the respect I gave you before wasn't enough." So Sadigan took this to heart, and he said, "It's the same thing with me. Every day I learn Torah, every day I grow, every day I understand more. And every day I understand that my avodah, my service of the Ribbon Shalom yesterday is not enough. And that's why I'm so distraught." And that's what the Berditchever says, that when Rosh Chodesh comes, when Yom Tov comes, when Yom Kippur comes, our understanding is raised to a new plane. And we understand that, yes, yesterday we brought karbonos. It's very nice, we brought karbonos. But without diktuk, without precision, without caution, it's possible that we were tamei, they were tamei. And now we understand that's not good enough. That's the idea of the Caparo for Tumas Mikdash U'Kedoshav. It's not a Caparo for Averis. The Caparo for Averis, that's with the Soyer La'azazel. It's a Caparo because I understand that the mitzvos I did yesterday aren't enough. They have to be raised to a higher plane. Because had I done the mitzvah the way I should have done the mitzvah, I wouldn't have made mistakes yesterday. There wouldn't have been tum. So again, says the Avnei Nezer, the Soyer La'azazel, that's to rid us of Averis, of crimes, of sins. The Soyer LaHashem, which is Mechaper and Tumas Mikdash U'Kedoshav, is to raise our Avodas Hashem to a higher level. So now let's ask ourselves the question. Now that we understand the purpose of the two Seirim, which should we bring first? Which comes first, which comes second? So we know we have a klal, we have a general principle, Sur Meira V'asei Tov. First stop doing evil, and then do good. So we would have said, according to this analysis, that first we should bring the Soyer La'azazel, that divests ourselves of the evil, and then we should bring the Soyer LaHashem, because that elevates our good to a higher plane. And the halacha is the exact opposite. The halacha is that first you perform the Soyer LaHashem, and the Soyer La'azazel remains alive, the Kohen doesn't even approach it. V'asoyer asher olav hagoyro La'azazel yo'om archai lifnei Hashem. That Soyer remains alive until when? Until all the sprinklings of the blood of the Soyer LaHashem are completed. So the order is reversed. So the Avnei Nezer says that that rule of Sur Meira V'asei Tov is not a hard and fast rule. There are exceptions to that rule. Sometimes what we need to do to spark tshuva is to raise ourselves to a higher plane of spirituality. That gives us the energy, that gives us the drive, that gives us the oomph to then work at divesting ourselves of the evil. And therefore says the Sachat Shavar, that's the seder, that's the order. First the Soyer LaHashem. We raise ourselves at Yom Kippur. We raise ourselves to a new plane of awareness, new plane of understanding. We engage in Avodas Hashem on a higher level. And on that higher level, then we are motivated and driven to get rid of the Averis. We have to know that that's what our Yom Kippur can be. The Berditchever, Dushas Levi, says an amazing thing. The incense that was brought on Yom Kippur is called Daka min Hadaka, the fine of the fine. The incense always was fine, but on Yom Kippur it was ground the second time to make it Daka min Hadaka. So like this. Ruchnius, spirituality, is called Daka, is called fine. It's a very fine thing. Materialism is coarse, but spirituality is very fine. Daka min hadaka, the fine of the fine, is the joy, is the pleasure of spirituality. The pleasure that a person has in doing a mitzvah, that's called daka min hadaka. You know, if you ever read the wine reviews in the newspaper, and you have these people who review the vintages, and they tell you that, this bottle of wine, the subtle blackberry flavor set against the background of the vanilla and the smoky flavors of the oak casks and so on and so forth. Now, if I would drink that same wine, I would say, vinegar! Can't even swallow it. Give me Coca-Cola. That's for me. Because my taste isn't adequately refined. But if you develop a taste for the finer things of life, you wouldn't trade a vintage Bordeaux for a bottle of Coca-Cola. The taste, the pleasure is much more subtle, more complex, more elevated, more sublime. Gashmius, the material life, is coarse. The spiritual life is daka, it's fine. And the pleasure that comes from spirituality is daka min hadaka, is the most fine. Says the Berditchever, Yom Kippur is a Yom Tanug. Yom Kippur is a day of pleasure. That's what Yom Kippur is. And you think about it, it really is a day of pleasure. You know, the whole year, we're so dissatisfied with ourselves. If you think about it. I mentioned, I believe, Rosh Hashanah. That Rabbi Aaron Kotler, Great Tsadikim, lived in America in the 50s, early 60s, and he lived at the beginning of the revolution of entertainment technology. Television was emerging, the transistor radio was something which has just been invented. He probably couldn't imagine what we'd have today. And he asked, why was this? Why were these inventions all of a sudden brought forth? So he said like this, he said, because people's lives are so wretched, they're so miserable, people have a sense of meaninglessness to their lives, that if they wouldn't have amusements to distract them, they would be jumping out of the windows. So the Ribono Shel Olam in his Rachmanus created new distractions, new toys to entertain us. So we have television and we have transistor radios, we can walk wherever we want with them. And that gives us a sense of contentment, but in reality it just masks over the fact of dissatisfaction, depression, and meaninglessness in our lives. And what we have today, many times over. And if we think about it for a moment, we all have this sense of dissatisfaction with our lives. They're not what they should be. We're plagued with guilt and depression. But in Yom Kippur we feel good. Because Yom Kippur is the one day a year that we know this is where we should be, this is what we should be doing. To spend the day with the Ribono Shel Olam in intimate conversation is a beautiful thing. I heard a story of an elderly lady, and she was davening in a shul, and people were looking out for her, that she shouldn't overstrain herself, shouldn't compromise her health. So well-meaning people went over to her and said, maybe you should go home and rest. And she said, no. She says, I have so much to talk to the Ribono Shel Olam about. She says, I can't go home. There's so much to do, so much to say, so much I want to express. She says, Yom Kippur is literally a Yom Tanu. It's a day of pleasure, a day of spiritual bliss. Yes, it's a bliss which is daka min adaka. You have to have very refined taste to appreciate it. But it's a Yom Tanu. And if we see it as that, then it can be the spark of a beginning. So for those of us, the Yom Kippur is not going to be the culmination of a process. It's not going to be the end of a process. Because we haven't worked during Elul, and we haven't worked on Rosh Hashanah, and we haven't worked during Aseret Yemei Teshuvah. So it's not going to be the pinnacle, it's not going to be the capstone, the apex of a process. But let it be the beginning of a process. It's so gishmak, it's so pleasurable, it's such a joy to be together with the Ribono Shel Olam. Let it be the beginning, let it be the impetus, let it be the spark that gets us moving. Let's make good, meaningful, powerful Kabbalahs and get the credit in advance. We'll tip the scale of judgment in our favor, but more than that, we'll finally get our lives on track. So what I'm telling you is that there's another way to look at Yom Kippur. If we look at it as a culmination, if we look at it as an end, if we look at it as a time to put tshuva to bed for another year, that this is it, and we approach the Ribono Shel Olam that way, there are only two possibilities. One is that we're going to be engaged in a tremendous act of self-delusion and deception. We're going to try to fool ourselves and fool the Ribono Shel Olam. Well, you can fool yourself, but you can't fool the Ribono Shel Olam. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that it'll be a very, very, very depressing day. Because if it really is the end, and this is what we've made out of it, then I can't think of anything which is more depressing. But if we reorient ourselves and look at Yom Kippur not as an end but as a beginning, a day of such sublime joy, and keep in mind that one of the first words that the Chazan says on Yom Kippur, before Kol Nidrei, or Zaru al Tzadik ul Yishvei Leiv Simcha, that for the upright and for the Tzadikim there's joy. That's what Yom Kippur is all about. It's the Yom Tanu. It's a day of spiritual joy. It could be the impetus to make a new beginning. And we can make that new beginning with solid, firm Kabbalahs, which will also be, as we said, a strategy for being Zoyech Badin, because the Ribono Shel Olam will credit to our accounts everything that results. We'll end with a story. There were two great Tzadikim, two great Rebbes, that came to Eretz Yisrael. Actually, both came during the Second World War. The Gerer Rebbe and the Belzer Rebbe. They both lost what can't even be imagined. Both lost virtually their entire families. Both lost tens of thousands of Hasidim. They came to Eretz Yisrael physically broken. The Ger Rebbe, Rabbi Mordechai, the Imrei Emes, came first. And after that, Rabbi Arla, the Belzer Rebbe, came. When the Belzer Rebbe came, when he arrived in Yerushalayim, so the Ger Rebbe decided to visit him. These two men again, physically broken. They lost so much. Their entire Hasidus was decimated. They came with Yechidim, with members of their families and their following that could be counted on fingers. And the Gerer Rebbe told the Belzer Rebbe the following verse. It says in the Chumash that when Yosef and Binyamin reunited, it says they cried on each other's shoulders. So Rashi says, what were they crying about? So Yosef cried on the Churban Beis Hamikdash that was in the Chelko Shel Binyamin, that was in the portion of Binyamin. And Binyamin cried over the Churban of the Mishkan Shiloh, which was in the portion of Yosef. That's what they cried about. So asked the Gerer Rebbe, why didn't they cry about their own Churbanos? Yosef cried about the Churban in Binyamin's portion. Binyamin cried about the Churban in Yosef's portion. Why didn't they cry about the Churban in their own portion? Yosef should have cried for the Mishkan Shiloh, and Binyamin should have cried for the Beis Hamikdash. So the Gerer Rebbe said, from here you see that for someone else's Churban, you cry. But for your Churban, you build. You don't cry. You build. So the Gerer Rebbe said, Belzer Rav, you have to rebuild. And I have to rebuild. This is not a time for tears. The Kachava, that today, Ger and Belz are two kingdoms of Torah and Chassidus in Eretz Yisrael and worldwide. Every Yid is the Beis Hamikdash. And every Yid who fails to realize his potential is a Churban Beis Hamikdash. When we look at other people and we see their failures, for that we should cry. That's a Rachmanus. If your neighbor hasn't become what he could become, for that it's worth crying. But over your own Churban, you don't cry, you build. And that's what Yom Kippur has to be for us. If we look at it just as a day for tears, for crying, and we figure that we had a good cry, and now it's over, and on to the rest of our lives, we will have missed the whole point. Your own Churban is not an occasion for tears. Your own Churban is an occasion for building. The Rebbeinu Shalom should give us all this common sense, the seichel, to identify those, as we said, very, very specific points where improvement is feasible. We should make solid Kabbalahs, solid resolutions, which are well-defined and verifiable. And thereby, this Yom Kippur should be the beginning of a process of improvement that will last throughout the year. And all the zchuyos, all the merits, and all the tshuva that follows should be credited to our account in advance, and thereby we should be zayich. I once heard a rabbi on a tape. He was giving a talk to students about how to prepare sermons in their congregations. And he mentioned that he prepares his drushas for Yom Kippur. You know when? So people would say, maybe in the summer, maybe Rosh Chodesh Elul. Says, I prepare my sermons Motzoi Yom Kippur after Ne'ilah. That's when you start preparing for the next Yom Kippur. That this Yom Kippur should not be an end. This Yom Kippur should be a beginning. Our Kabbalahs, our resolution should be firm that we're going to make this into a meaningful beginning, and we should be Zeicha B'din, all of us, with the entire Klal Yisrael, for a year, a Shana Tova Mesuka, a happy and a sweet year, a year of Yeshua, of salvation, of refuah for all those who need refuah, And first and foremost, on top of everything else, Shalom Yisrael. Thank you for listening.